Welcome back. This is a place for quiet stories from the wizarding world, the paths canon never walked, the choices that might have changed everything. Here we take a single moment and turn it slightly. We follow the consequences slowly, carefully, year by year. If you enjoy these long, immersive journeys into alternate magic, consider subscribing and settling in. Now, let's start. Harry Potter stands in a ruined Hogwarts corridor. Stone hangs in the air like shrapnel frozen mid-explosion. Torches gutter against walls spiderwebbed with fractures. And the silence after the blast is louder than any curse. Behind him, Ron is on his knees, blood in his hair. Hermione clutches a shattered arm, eyes wide, not with fear of Death Eaters, but of the boy whose wand is still smoking in his hand. This is not a memory, it is a possible future. The wizarding world operates under a fundamental delusion that the boy who lived is the bulwark against catastrophe, the one fixed point of safety in a war defined by volatility. They are wrong. The real ticking time bomb was never merely Voldemort's return, but the unstable weapon built around a traumatized child. A child carrying his enemy's soul in his scar like a splinter of radioactive glass. Canon treats that fragment as a plot device. In this timeline, we treat it as what it is: a constant, corrosive soul resonance, amplifying every spike of rage, every flash of humiliation, every desperate act of love into raw, explosive power. The prophecy did not just name a savior, it licensed the world to treat Harry as a tool, a weapon being polished in the dark, passed between Dumbledore, the Order, and the Ministry, each convinced they alone can aim it. Imagine a Hogwarts where the whispers start early. The flying incident with Draco is not written off as schoolboy bravado, but logged as a dangerous loss of control. The Parseltongue in the dueling club is not a curiosity, it is a red flag. After the Chamber of Secrets, when Ginny Weasley nearly dies in a pool of ink and memory, the conversation in the staff room is no longer only about Tom Riddle's diary. It is about the boy who walked out alive again, with magic that keeps answering violence with greater violence. In that world, love and loyalty do not soften Harry. They sharpen him. Every betrayal, Lockhart's cowardice, Fudge's denial, Umbridge's sadism, Dumbledore's calculated distance, twists his need to protect into something tactically lethal. The Order of the Phoenix becomes less a resistance and more a crisis committee, whispering about contingencies, containment wards, emergency portkeys, the unspoken question of whether the safest place for their symbol is behind reinforced doors. Dumbledore's greatest fear shifts. It is no longer only Voldemort's victory, but Harry's breaking point. He has seen what uncontrolled magic does in children. He watched Ariana Dumbledore's power turn a family home into a private war zone. Now he studies Harry across his desk and wonders, with methodical certainty, how many more deaths it would take for that corridor vision to become real. This is not a story where Harry turns cackling villain. It is far more intimate and far more frightening. What happens if Harry remains loving, remains convinced he is doing good, and yet becomes objectively dangerous to everyone closest to him? A threat not born of malice, but of fracture. Across this video, we will move with clinical precision through the pressure points of canon. The Chamber, the Department of Mysteries, The Horcrux hunt, tracing how a handful of different choices, a few more lies, one or two delayed interventions, could turn the boy who lived into the most unpredictable variable in the war. The question is not whether he can be stopped. The question is when someone realizes they might have to try. Halloween, 1981, the night the weapon was forged. The answer begins on a night the world thinks it understands. Halloween, 1981, a cottage in Godric's Hollow, already mythologized before the smoke has even cleared. Lily's body on the nursery floor, the echo of her sacrifice still burning like an invisible ward, the killing curse unleashed, rebounding with brutal elegance. Voldemort's body torn apart, his wand clattering uselessly against a crib. Canon stops there and calls it a miracle, a clean victory sealed in a single flash of green. They are wrong, because in this timeline, the narrative does not cut away when the Dark Lord falls. It lingers on what cannot be seen, the dislodged shard of soul hunting for an anchor. The infant magical core, raw and unshielded, answering with a hungry resonance. What takes root in Harry is not a Horcrux label to be discovered in adolescence, but a condition the unspeakables already have a term for: soul resonance, the forced cohabitation of two incompatible souls sharing one magical core, amplifying power while fraying emotional stability to the edge of war. Canon treats this as a plot twist revealed on a headmaster's timetable. In the Slytherin timeline, it is logged as a risk index before the night is over. Dumbledore arrives, not as a kindly custodian, but as the first responder to an arcane accident. He steps through the ruined doorway with methodical certainty, expecting grief and residue. Instead, the house moves. The nursery walls bow and straighten like lungs trying to remember how to breathe. Nails reverse in the wood. Shattered glass lifts, hovers, then fuses back into the window, only to spiderweb again as residual curses, long spent, flare briefly to malignant life around the crib. At the epicenter, Harry is screaming, and every pulse of sound twists the room. This is the single altered action. Dumbledore does not quietly scoop up a sleeping child and later deposit him on a privet drive doorstep. He raises his wand to shield himself from a wave of infant magic that scorches the wallpaper into blackened runes. He watches Lily's body slide a few inches across the floor without being touched. He feels, with the trained instincts of a duelist, that the boy's core is not merely strong, it is unstable. By dawn, Harry Potter is no longer only a child to be protected. He is classified, privately, in sealed parchments, as a potential magical hazard. The Ministry's Department of Mysteries drafts a preliminary memorandum on the Potter variable, speculating whether prolonged soul resonance could produce either a savior of unprecedented power or a weapon being polished in the dark. Death Eater remnants, trawling for rumors in Nocturne, hear only fragments that the Dark Lord's fall may have left behind a masterpiece to be moulded. The language around Harry shifts before he can walk. Not boy, but asset. Not orphan, but vector. Dumbledore tells himself that he will love the child while planning, with cold precision, how to contain the anomaly if love fails. Authority fractures in silence. No one agrees on whether the priority is his happiness, his loyalty, or his leash. If the night that saved the wizarding world also forged its most volatile magical anomaly, then the question facing its leaders is no longer purely moral. It is logistical, tactical, and terrifying. What does responsible leadership look like when your hope is also your hazard, protection, or containment? And how long can anyone pretend those are not mutually exclusive? A childhood under glass, raising a living risk factor. Responsible leadership, in this timeline, begins with architecture. They do not send Harry Potter to Privet Drive. They entomb him in comfort, hidden beneath an alpine ridge, behind wards that hum like a trapped swarm, lies an estate that is less home than controlled environment, a subterranean fortress of polished stone and soft carpets, where every corridor is threaded with containment charms. The windows lie. They open not onto sky, but onto curated illusions. A blue too even, clouds that loop, a sun that never quite moves. When Harry presses his palm to the glass, there is a faint resistance, a static prickle of magic reminding him that beyond this projection is rock, spellwork, and fear. The world he sees is a painting. The world that sees him is a lab report. From the beginning, the adults refuse the language of parenting. They call it training. Healers in quiet robes track his magical surges with methodical certainty, quills scratching whenever his emotions spike. Before he learns his letters, he learns breathing patterns. Before he holds a wand, he holds a stress charm that darkens as his heart rate climbs. Every tantrum becomes a data point. Every nightmare is logged, cross-referenced, and filed under risk. They are wrong, of course, when they insist this is protection without cost. The cost is internal. Harry grows up understanding that his feelings are not merely inconvenient. They are tactically lethal. Rage is explosive magic. Panic is shattered glass and boiling tea. Even joy is suspect. Laughter makes the lights flicker. He learns to flinch from himself. To keep him from vanishing entirely into that cultivated silence, they assign him a companion, not a guard, officially, a peer. In this Slytherin timeline, it is a young Nymphadora Tonks, her metamorph Magus face a perpetual defiance of the estate's controlled sameness. She is reckless where he is careful, loud where he is contained, tripping over ward lines with a grin, and insisting the world outside is bigger than these corridors. Their resonance is immediate and dangerous. Both are loyal to a fault. Both hunger for connection. But where Harry turns every misfire inward, if a cup cracks, it is his fault, his failure of discipline. Tonks meets the same incident with a shrug and a joke about overexcited crockery. His self-blame collides with her denial, her bravado, and between them, a fragile, necessary normality is improvised. Pattern interrupt. The first time he hurts her, it is almost nothing. A flare of accidental magic during a game. A burst of force that sends her sprawling, wrist bruised. The healers call it minor. Tonks calls it worth it. Harry calls it proof. This is where the psychological vice tightens. He is told he is precious, a masterpiece to be moulded, a weapon being polished in the dark, and yet every protocol screams that he is also hazardous, loved, but behind glass, wanted, but only if he remains controlled. He begins to measure his worth not by what he does, but by what he successfully prevents himself from doing. The more he cares, the more terrifying his proximity feels. Sitting beside Tonks, watching her change her eyes to make him laugh, he holds his hands very still in his lap, as if movement alone might be catastrophic. Affection becomes a calculated risk. Attachment is potential collateral damage. This is the seed of the central tragedy. Harry's soul resonance with others is real, powerful, and in this timeline, it is pathologized. Love is both his stabilizer and his trigger. The estate teaches him a lesson he will never quite unlearn, that the shortest line between his heart and another person may also be the fault line along which the world breaks. And outside the illusion windows, the real sky is already darkening, as people who have never met him begin to plan what exactly they will dare to ask their living risk factor to do. Fortress mind, loaded wand, designing a dangerous prodigy. Inside the Alpine estate, that gathering storm is met not with fear, but with curriculum. Harry's childhood becomes a controlled detonation, conducted in slow motion, every spark catalogued, every flare of power reduced to a line in a healer's logbook. In this timeline, the boy who lived is not educated. He is calibrated. Occlumency begins before his handwriting stabilizes. Bellatrix frames it as a game of walls and doors, but the healers she borrows from St. Mungos know precisely what they are doing, stabilizing the soul resonance of a child who houses two consciousnesses and whose accidental magic can already crack stone. Meditation drills are grafted onto wandless magic exercises. Hold the image of a still lake, then levitate a quill without a twitch. Slow your breathing, then snuff every candle in the room with a thought. Controlled exposure to stressors follows. Raised voices, simulated duels, staged betrayals, all while brass instruments record fluctuations in his magical output. The reports read less like school evaluations and more like weapons testing. Under mild stress, subject's aura spikes by 30%. Under perceived threat to bonded individual, output becomes non-linear. They are wrong about many details of his psychology, but they are not wrong about the pattern. Love is the accelerant, fear the fuse. The Slytherin timeline treats that discovery not as a warning, but as a design parameter. Canon calls him impulsive. Here, that trait is carved into rapid threat response. Startle him, and he does not flinch. His magic flows along pre-trained channels. Shield first, disarm second, disable third, executed in less than a heartbeat. His loyalty, once a schoolboy virtue, is re-engineered into unbreakable fixation on designated protected targets. Draco, Bellatrix, later Hermione. Anyone entered into that inner ledger becomes a node that can trigger catastrophic surges in his power, if endangered. His capacity for love, so often romanticized as a soft defense, is weaponized into a multiplier. He is taught, gently, relentlessly, that caring is costly, that every attachment widens the aperture through which his magic can roar. When Bellatrix fakes an injury during a training duel and collapses bleeding at his feet, the resulting blast shatters every window in the fortress and knocks 3 adults unconscious. The healers do not forbid such scenarios. They request more. 3 disciplines come to define him. Occlumency, now no child's exercise, becomes a fortress architecture built around volatile emotion, with nested memories arranged like kill zones and blind corridors for intrusive legilimency. Parcel tongue, once a stigma, is dissected as a diagnostic instrument, its hissing cadences mapped against fluctuations in the Horcrux's influence. And etiquette, painstaking, aristocratic, suffocating etiquette, teaches him to navigate authority, to bow at the right angle and smile at the right joke while hiding the simple truth that his magic, under sufficient strain, is tactically lethal. Harry is taught to imagine his mind as a citadel on a dark hill, its gates under his exclusive command, and his magic as a kingdom whose borders he alone patrols. Sovereignty as self-regulation, rule or be ruled, yet the adults around him never quite adopt that metaphor. To them he remains a weapon being polished in the dark, a masterpiece to be moulded, admired for balance and sharpness, but always, ultimately, meant to be used. And here the design reveals its flaw. The tighter the discipline, the more absolute the reliance on control, the more catastrophic any breach must become. Fortresses do not fail gracefully, they fail all at once. The methodical certainty with which Bellatrix closes every gap in his defences is the same certainty with which one day a single unanticipated blow will send all that contained power outward, indiscriminate, seeking the nearest target. The question is not whether the walls will be tested. It is who will be standing closest when the first stone falls. Off-screen Hogwarts, a wall without its chosen hero. The walls do not crack in isolation. While Harry is being refined into a weapon being polished in the dark, the wider war adjusts around the hollow where the boy who lived should have stood. The wizarding world believes time will grant them safety, that childhood is a neutral buffer zone. They are wrong. The year 1991 arrives with empty carriages and an unclaimed legend. In this timeline, the boats crossed the Black Lake without their destined catalyst. No skinny boy under oversized robes, no soul resonance shiver when wand meets wand. Quirinus Quirrell still returns from his Alpine pilgrimage, with Voldemort fused to the back of his skull, still hunts the stone beneath the castle, but without an 11-year-old anomaly to short-circuit his plans. The burden of intervention falls squarely on Dumbledore. The confrontation at the Mirror of Erised is no proxy duel. It is open, catastrophic power, headmaster against parasite. He wins, but the victory is expensive, shearing years from a lifespan already mortgaged to old curses. Hogwarts sees what its guardian truly is, a failing fortress held together by will. 1992 is not the year of childish adventure. It is the year the walls bleed. The Chamber of Secrets opens with methodical certainty. Students fall, petrified, one by one, and no Gryffindor first year hears a basilisk in the pipes and decides to follow the voice. Ginny Weasley walks further and further into Tom Riddle's orbit, her diary confessions deepening into possession. By the time the staff triangulate the entrance, the damage is irreversible. Either she dies under the castle, or she is dragged back breathing but broken. Her rescue, a Pyrrhic masterpiece of too late heroism. The basilisk is ultimately contained by coordinated professors, but the school is traumatized. Parents whisper that perhaps Harry Potter exists after all, and that if he is not here, then he is being hidden because he is not safe. By 1993-1994, the pattern is visible even to bureaucrats. Sirius Black escapes Azkaban, and without a public ward of the school to anchor his narrative, the Ministry rewrites his motive overnight. Not a godfather seeking a child, but a fanatic racing toward the contained weapon. Dementors are not stationed around Hogwarts. They are ringed, in secret, around Harry's undisclosed location, turning his life into a gilded prison, policed by the literal embodiment of despair. Every surge of adolescent magic is logged, analysed, filed as potential risk. The macro timeline bends under this absence. Without a schoolyard hero to rally around, Voldemort's scattered followers regroup in silence, trading spectacle for infiltration. The Ministry, embarrassed by each crisis, compensates with more authority, more surveillance, more legal scaffolding, built around one unseen boy. Each attack, each body, becomes another argument in closed-door meetings. We must use the Potter boy before it's too late, or before he turns on us. The war does not pause for his childhood. It grinds forward with methodical certainty. Every September he does not board the Hogwarts Express is another year of pressure compacting around a single human fault line. Harry feels it without yet naming it. He is not being saved. He is being stored. The next fracture will not be external. It will begin the moment someone decides the storage phase is over. When the Dark Lord comes back stronger and younger, the storage phase ends in the second year. Harry never attends Hogwarts. The tragedy of Ginny Weasley is a methodical certainty. The diary consumes her entirely to give Tom Riddle molecular density. By the time the staff discovers the entrance, a 16-year-old Riddle has walked out into the world, living, breathing, and tactically lethal. There is no boy who lived on site to thrust a basilisk fang through paper and prophecy. In this timeline, the diary is not destroyed. It graduates. Riddle emerges not as a ghost of adolescence, but as an apprentice Dark Lord with access to his future. The link between Horcruxes is not merely metaphysical, drawn by the distant, humming soul resonance of his other fragments. The teenage Tom begins to dream memories that are not his yet, glimpses of Albania, of robed followers, of a baby's failed murder and a lightning-shaped scar. He does not understand immediately. He understands enough when he finally reaches the wraith of Voldemort in exile. The reunion is not hierarchical, but alchemical. Old and young do not bow. They merge. The result is a Voldemort who remembers every humiliation and every experiment, yet wears a face that can still smile without cracking. Youthfully adaptable, anciently ruthless, he is fascinated by the anomaly that ruined his first ascension. Harry Potter, missing variable, a weapon being polished in the dark. In the Slytherin timeline, Voldemort's return is not a theatrical resurrection in a graveyard. It is an incremental condensation of power. A Dark Lord recomposed before the world has even processed that he was gone. Open conflict begins years early. Muggleborns vanish in patterns too precise to be dismissed as coincidence. The Ministry whispers about isolated incidents. Dumbledore stops pretending. The Order reforms not as a noble remnant, but as a desperate firewall with no boy who lived to rally behind, only a child with an unwanted fragment in his skull and an alpine fortress for a nursery. The question inside that war room is not, How do we protect Harry? It is, what do we do with Harry Potter? To some, he is a masterpiece to be molded, an asset whose very existence might destabilize Voldemort's Horcrux lattice. To others, he is a volatile container of enemy magic, a future breach in their own defenses. They are wrong to think they can postpone the decision indefinitely. Voldemort is already deciding for them. Framed in mythic terms, the new Voldemort ceases to be merely a tyrant. He becomes a dark alchemist of souls. He has failed to conquer love from the outside. Now he will weaponize it from within. The greatest antidote to love, he concludes, is not hatred. It is love turned inward, curdled into possessiveness, paranoia, and fear. Harry is no longer just his enemy. He is the most promising experiment in the laboratory of the war. Voldemort does not plan to kill the boy who bears his echo. He intends to complete him, either by reclaiming the fragment he left behind, or by corrupting Harry into a living extension of his will, a blade that will learn to cut precisely where it cares most. The first test of that blade is coming, and the people Harry loves will be the whetstone. The Book of Admittance wakes up. Harry can't stay hidden. The first tremor does not happen in the Alpine fortress, where Harry is being honed. It happens in a locked tower at Hogwarts, in a book that is not supposed to protest. The Book of Admittance and the Quill of Acceptance are designed to be neutral instruments of institutional memory, recording births and magical surges with bureaucratic obedience. In this timeline, they become the first open dissenters. Every year since 1981, the quill has written and rewritten the same name. Each stroke darker, each loop of ink pressed deeper into the ancient parchment, until Harry James Potter no longer sits on the page so much as burns through it. They try to forget the boy who lived. They are wrong. By 1991, the magic woven into those artifacts reaches a breaking point. Wards that should have rendered Harry's existence an administrative ghost start to misfire. Quills in the ministry's registry office splutter when they pass his line. Census charms return corrupted data. Even the trace flickers around a boy who has never set foot in Britain's legal jurisdiction. Hogwarts, as an ancient sovereign authority, begins to call in its debt. The castle's foundational enchantments simply refuse the premise that a chosen one can be permanently off the grid. The metaphor becomes literal. Around the Lestrange estate, bell jars of protective magic, layered by Bellatrix, refined by darker allies, reinforced by Harry himself, begin to flicker at the edges. At sunrise, the air over the snowline shimmers with faint house elf apparitions, bearing letters that cannot deliver. At midnight, the wards ring with distant chimes, as the schools call hammers against them, a slow, methodical certainty rather than an attack. The world's magic is not asking, it is insisting. The conflict this triggers is not a shouting match, it is a strategic summit. Whether it is Dumbledore confronting Bellatrix on neutral ground, or McGonagall slipping past the wards as an animagus envoy, or a darker protector standing in the doorway of Harry's training hall, the argument is the same. Exposure will make you a target. The adult insists, the war is not ready for you, and you are not ready for the war. Hidden, you are safe. Harry answers with the quiet cruelty of accuracy. Isolation is already killing him. The soul resonance that ties him to Voldemort amplifies in silence. His temper spikes in training duels, and minor uncontrolled surges have already cracked stone and shattered glass inches from the only people he cares about. A weapon being polished in the dark does not become less dangerous, it becomes untested. Here lies his strategic realization, the pivot of the Slytherin timeline. If he is the heart of the prophecy, then pretending to live on the margins is fantasy. Power radiates. It does not politely withdraw. To minimize collateral damage, he argues, he must move into the one environment built to absorb and redirect magical adolescence. Hogwarts. Not the wilderness, not a foreign safe house. The castle at the center of Britain's magical resonance field. The pattern breaks with a single, almost mundane gesture. He takes the Hogwarts letter and signs his name with deliberate care, overlaying the glowing script the quill has been trying to write for a decade. Consent, meeting, compulsion. The decision is made. Harry Potter will go to Hogwarts, not as a wide-eyed first year, but as a contained anomaly walking into the most densely populated magical environment in Britain, a tactically lethal masterpiece stepping into the crowd. The world believes a student is arriving. A weapon is entering the school. Terms of containment. Harry negotiates with Dumbledore. The world thinks the paperwork is a formality. They are wrong. The consent meeting becomes a summit. Neutral ground is demanded and, astonishingly, granted. Not Hogwarts, not the Ministry, but an empty Wizengamot chamber. Its purple benches abandoned, its gilded crests staring down like extinct gods of authority. In this timeline, the boy who lived walks into the heart of legislative power, not as a defendant, but as a negotiating bloc unto himself. On one side of the circular floor, Dumbledore and a cluster of ministry officials, Bones, a tight-lipped Bagnold, two unspeakables in featureless masks. On the other, Bellatrix Lestrange, in perfectly controlled black, no longer the shrieking fanatic of Azkaban's future, but a high society matriarch whose alpine estate has quietly become a fortress. Between them, a single chair, already occupied. Harry does not stand when they enter. Stakeholders do not rise for petitioners. Dumbledore opens with concern, with grandfatherly cadence and carefully measured pauses, yet every sentence orbits around a single gravitational fact. They need his cooperation. The trace reports, the shattered alleyway in Dijon, the Muggle hospital wing frozen in a dome of glass-hard air when his soul resonance spiked during a childhood fever. Each incident is projected as if evidence in a war crimes tribunal. Each time, Harry calmly annotates the record. "I was 8, he notes, when an image of twisted bed frames appears. No wand, no conscious intent. You are not here because I broke your laws. You are here because you cannot predict the next escalation." His voice is level, almost academic. It is the self-awareness that unnerves them. The way he dissects his own risk profile with methodical certainty, as if discussing someone else's weapon system. Bellatrix plays the matriarch to the hilt, correcting titles, demanding precise legal language, forcing Bagnold to acknowledge Harry as party of the first part rather than subject. In the Slytherin timeline, she has learned to sheathe madness in etiquette. She lets Dumbledore speak, but only after she has established that her ward is not a masterpiece to be moulded by Hogwarts, but a contract partner. The terms, when finally read into the record, sound less like school enrollment and more like containment protocol. Harry will attend as a third-year equivalent. His dormitory will be wrapped in experimental wards, keyed to his magical signature, designed to dampen uncontrolled surges without suppressing conscious spellwork. He will submit to mandatory occlumency check-ins with a mutually agreed legilimens. Dumbledore offers Snape Bellatrix counters with an unspeakable. They settle on a rotating panel. Dueling is explicitly restricted. No sanctioned duels without faculty oversight. No unsupervised use of offensive magic above a defined threshold. In exchange, the Ministry signs away retroactive liability for every prior uncontrolled incident, sealing them as acts of war by unidentified hostile magic, rather than crimes. More importantly, Harry claims veto power over any experimental probing of his soul resonance. No rituals, no diagnostic curses, no harmless scans without his written consent. The weapon will walk into their fortress, but it will not be disassembled on the table. When Dumbledore frames Hogwarts as sanctuary, Harry finally smiles, thin and almost kind. He offers them the Trojan horse metaphor himself. Let Voldemort's gaze fix on the castle. He suggests, let the Dark Lord hurl himself against layered wards, oral patrols, and a headmaster who commands the loyalty of half the civilized world. Publicly, Harry positions his presence as bait, a way to drag the war into a controlled battlefield. Privately, Bellatrix hears it in the microscopic pause. He knows the horse is already full. Not with Death Eaters, but with whatever volatile magic coils around his scar and whispers at the edge of sleep. If it breaks loose, it will not respect ward boundaries. The Ministry delegation fractures along that line of fear. One undersecretary quietly advocates a secret Azkaban annex, a bespoke cell under the North Sea. An unspeakable proposes preemptive restraints, binding runes, a collar keyed to his pulse. Others, more ambitious or more desperate, see only leverage, a tactically lethal child who might end the war in a single decisive strike. Dumbledore walks the razor's edge between them, and the narrative he crafts is simple. Protect Harry to protect the world from Voldemort, and protect the world from Harry by binding him to a place where he can be watched, taught, steered. It is not mercy, it is risk management disguised as mentorship. In the echoing silence after signatures flare and cool, Harry looks up at the empty tiers of the Wizengamot and understands, with terrifying clarity, that he has just negotiated the terms of his own captivity, and he has won. What no one in that chamber yet realizes is that a contained weapon can still choose its own targets once the war comes home to Hogwarts' stone corridors. First step into the arena, a different Hogwarts arrival. The Ministry imagines that parchment and signatures will hold him, that once the train doors close, the weapon they have licensed will travel politely to its new enclosure. They are wrong. On the Hogwarts Express, in this timeline, Harry Potter is an exercise in controlled contradiction. Internally, the journey is his first unmediated exposure to chaos. Children laughing off key, sweets trolleys rattling, the sky a continuous, impossible blue beyond the glass. After years of alpine stone and curated silence, the sheer density of unplanned life hits him like oxygen after a near drowning. Externally, he is alpine marble, cold, still, polished because Bellatrix and the Minders have carved one rule into his nervous system. Any slip could hurt someone. He sits with his hands folded, back never touching the seat, eyes half-lidded. Every burst of laughter is catalogued, every jostle measured for proximity to his wand arm, every spike of temper pressed ruthlessly back behind occlumency walls. When a red-haired boy stumbles, catching Harry's shoulder to steady himself, the contact is brief but seismic. Harry's magic surges, heat blooming under his skin. Only methodical certainty keeps it from flaring outward. The boy apologizes and moves on, seeing only a quiet, intense third year with a famous scar. He does not see the micro-flinch, the way Harry's fingers twitch for a curse before discipline slams down like a lid. Nightfall at the lake should be wonder. Lanterns on the black water, the castle rising like a fairy tale fortress against the dark. Canon treats this as a homecoming. The Slytherin timeline does not. To Harry, the boats are not charming. They are vulnerable platforms with no cover and a clear firing line from the shore. The castle is not a sanctuary. It is a crowded, flammable maze full of fragile lives and blind corners. As the first years gasp, he is already mapping arrow slits as potential choke points, courtyards as kill boxes, towers as artillery perches should war ever step onto these stones. His tether is waiting on the far bank. Nymphadora Tonks, now a newly minted Auror, assigned as liaison to Hogwarts, catches his eye as the boats approach. Their history is written in scars and whispered training sessions, late-night dueling drills under alpine stars, shared jokes about ministry incompetence, the quiet, treasonous promise that if he ever wants out, she will help him run. Here, under Dumbledore's wards, the reunion is both anchor and threat. She smiles too brightly for someone who has seen what his soul resonance can do to a practice dummy. He notes, with clinical detachment, that if he loses control in a corridor, she will be the first to move toward him, and therefore the first casualty. Inside the Great Hall, the social dissonance becomes deafening. Conversations dim as faces turn. The scar, the name, the myth arrive 3 seconds before the boy does. Whispers ripple. The boy who lived, the ministry's deal, the Lestrange ward. No one notices that he sits half a chair width apart from the nearest student, that his elbows never brush another robe, that his gaze keeps sliding, not to the enchanted ceiling, but to doors, windows, and the clustered proximity of candles to ancient, dry banners. He is a weapon being polished in the dark, scanning a room full of kindling. Then the sorting hat drops onto his head, and the narrative everyone expects collapses. The hat does not immediately see bravery or ambition. It feels pressure, a coiled, tactically lethal potential, humming at a frequency it was never meant to pass. Soul resonance roars against its seams. Its hesitation is not about Slytherin versus Gryffindor. It is a single, horrified question. Does this boy belong in any house at all? Or will sorting him merely decide where the first fracture line in Hogwarts will appear? The hat draws breath to answer, and in that suspended second, something else answers back. the headmaster and the hazard. Harry sets his boundaries. What answers is not the hat, but the castle itself. The wards shudder, the air thins, and for a heartbeat the great hall feels like the eye of a storm, trying to remember which direction to spin. Dumbledore moves. With methodical certainty, he breaks the tableau, hand closing on the brim. Voice mild as he announces that the sorting may be deferred. Minutes later, Harry is in the headmaster's office, and the performance is over. Here, the world is made of mechanisms and memory. Silver instruments whir and click, spooling threads of coloured smoke. Portraits feign sleep. The air tastes of lemon drops and war. In canon, these trinkets are background. In this timeline, they are diagnostic weapons, and several of them begin to scream. Needles spike, gyroscopic spheres judder off their stands. A slender glass column darkens from clear to arterial red. None of them point toward the distant, resurrected Voldemort. They all angle, with unerring, tactically lethal focus, at the boy standing politely on the rug. Dumbledore watches the readings stabilize around Harry's scar, and, beneath the beard and twinkle, something inside him quietly concedes a truth he has delayed naming. The Horcrux is not theory. It is present. It is awake. Old habits move faster than new resolutions. As Dumbledore speaks, gentle questions about the journey, about Bellatrix, about the alpine quiet of his childhood. His gaze sharpens, and a thread of legilimency lances out, subtle as breath. It hits polished glass, slides, fails to bite. Harry's eyes, already too still for a 13-year-old, lift to meet his. "Please don't do that again, headmaster." The words are impeccably courteous. The temperature in the room drops anyway. Dumbledore pauses, the spell dying on his tongue. Harry names it legilimency. Without heat, describes the pressure behind the eyes, the tug along old scars in his mind, then outlines, in precise, almost clinical language, why this is not adolescent boundary drama, but structural risk. His occlumency lattice is interwoven with the soul resonance of the Horcrux. Any external probe, especially from a wizard of Dumbledore's magnitude, could shear those layers, let the foreign shard slip its current containment, and bleed into his conscious channels. Tamper with the fortress, and you may invite the siege. Then the pattern breaks. Dumbledore, grasping for something human, offers the invisibility cloak. James Potter's cloak. For a moment, Harry simply looks at it, expression unreadable. When he reaches out, the reaction is not subtle. Candles gutter and then flare. Glass on nearby instruments trembles. One of the shrieking devices simply cracks down the middle and falls silent. Love is supposed to be his salvation. Here, it is also the tripwire. Dumbledore understands the metaphor, even as he repairs the glass with a murmured charm. Harry's anchor is not Hogwarts, not prophecy, not the abstract light. It is a handful of names and faces. Parents he never knew, a godfather in chains, one estranged Slytherin boy, and any threat to that closed circle does not merely upset him, it agitates the Horcrux. By the time Harry calmly folds the cloak over his arm and reasserts, with soft finality, that his mind is not to be entered without explicit consent, the balance of power in the office has shifted. The headmaster sees no pliable student. no masterpiece to be moulded at his own pace, but a weapon being polished in the dark that has read its own schematics and will not be passively steered. Dumbledore lets him go, wards humming uneasily in his wake. The question is no longer whether Harry belongs in Slytherin or Gryffindor. It is whether Hogwarts can contain him at all. And what will happen to the people he loves if it cannot? Classroom pressure cooker, friends inside the blast radius. Hogwarts answers that question with timetables and timetables as containment grids. In this timeline, the castle's daily routine becomes a pressure cooker. Every classroom, a calibrated risk assessment disguised as education. The worst of it, inevitably, is potions. The dungeons are already a fortress of controlled volatility. Snape's domain is glass, flame, and ego balanced over cauldrons. When a Hufflepuff misslices Moonstone 3 tables away, the potion should merely froth. It doesn't. The liquid arches, impossibly, toward Harry's station, dragged by an invisible resonance, and detonates in a plume of violet steam that slams against his hastily raised shield. Vials shatter across the room. A Slytherin 2 seats down screams, arm blistering where the steam licked bare skin. Harry never moved his wand. Snape sees everything. From that day, Snape's insults sharpen into diagnostic tools. Every sneer, every public humiliation is not just cruelty, but stress testing. How much pressure before the boy's soul resonance spikes and the room becomes shrapnel? The class believes they are watching a feud. They are wrong. They are watching hazard management. Defense against the dark arts is worse because here Harry is meant to strike back. A partner's disarming charm glances off his shield during drills, clips his shoulder, and something in him answers with methodical certainty. His return jinx is textbook, non-lethal, measured, but the air thickens, the lights dim, and the spell hits like a blasting curse. His partner flies into the wall, unconscious before they slide to the floor. The silence afterward is surgical. The professor praises his form with a voice 1 octave too calm, while, at the back, 2 Auror-trained portraits abandon their frames to alert the headmaster. Even Quidditch, that sanctioned chaos, becomes tactically lethal. A Slytherin chaser elbows his Ron equivalent, lanky, laughing, the one who treats Harry's power as normalcy rather than omen, sending him into a dangerous spin. Harry's rage ignites. The wind around his broom hardens, and when he cuts across the pitch to intercept, the air pressure shockwave knocks 3 players from the sky. Bones break on the grass. Harry lands shaking, victory in hand, catastrophe at his feet. Around him, a triad forms. The Ron figure grounds him in jokes and chess and late-night toast, a human ballast against the alpine isolation of his upbringing. The Hermione mind catalogues every surge, convinced the soul resonance can be quantified, healed, turned from weapon into masterpiece. And then there is the emotional counterpart, whether Ginny's fierce empathy or Draco's familiar darkness. Who does not flinch from the abyss in him? Who meets his fury with their own and therefore amplifies it? Each bond steadies him. Each bond, if threatened, promises escalation. Micro moments become case studies. A corridor confrontation. A bully hexes his friend's books into ash, laughs, raises his wand again. Harry steps between them, the temperature drops. His voice is quiet when he tells the bully to apologize. When they refuse, the ambient magic snaps, torches gutter, stone groans, and the bully's wand explodes in their hand, sending splinters into a bystander's face. The bully is terrified. The bystander is hospitalized. Harry has won. No one feels safe. The Ministry files these as underage anomalies, the Trace muttering vague alerts about uncontrolled surges near Hogwarts. Inside the castle, the staff know better. In the Slytherin timeline, Hogwarts is no longer just sanctuary. It is a containment facility with a house cup. Class sizes shift around Harry. Protective wards lace the ceilings of any room he regularly occupies, and Dumbledore quietly circulates dueling protocols titled, without irony, If Potter Loses Control, which raises the question the adults can no longer avoid. At what point does their duty of care invert? Not to shield Harry from a hostile world, but to shield the world from the blast radius of his love and loyalty. And if they choose restraint over trust, what exactly are they teaching the weapon being polished in the dark to become? Chamber of Secrets rewritten. When saving Ginny breaks the world, the Chamber of Secrets is where that question stops being hypothetical and becomes architecture. Stone, water, bone, and a boy whose love is calibrated to detonate. In this timeline, the descent beneath the castle is not a reckless Gryffindor charge. It is a controlled insertion by someone who knows, with methodical certainty, that losing his temper in an enclosed ancient space might qualify as an act of war. He walks beside Ron and Lockhart with an almost clinical stillness. Occlumency walls tight, Bellatrix's alpine drills echoing in his pulse. Breathe, center, contain. The world remembers a 12-year-old waving a sword. They are wrong. This Harry has spent 2 years watching adults draft protocols about his volatility. He has read the phrase, "If Potter loses control," in McGonagall's tidy script. Every dripping tunnel is a reminder that if he fractures here, the blast radius is not theoretical. It is load-bearing. When the cave-in separates him from Ron, the silence that follows is not boyish panic, but the heavy quiet of a weapon being polished in the dark. Alone, he enters the chamber with his magic coiled so tightly it hums against the wards, a low soul resonance that even the carved serpents seem to track with their stone eyes. Ginny's body on the wet floor is the focal point of his world, but he forces his gaze first to the diary, then to the boy standing over it. Tom Riddle, given spectral density by Ginny's life, recognizes what stands before him. The conversation becomes a psychological vivisection. Riddle does not simply monologue about blood and glory. He talks about fracture points, about how a half-made Horcrux is already an unstable edifice. He suggests, with the calm of a future Dark Lord, that killing the basilisk will flood Harry's system with venom and phoenix tears. That destroying the diary might jolt the parasitic shard in his skull. That any spike of rage could shear his mind away from his body. Riddle is tactically lethal. He is trying to make the chamber itself into a trigger. The basilisk's emergence is less a monster reveal and more a stress test. As fangs shatter stone and forks blinds the serpent, Harry holds and holds and holds until he stumbles back to Ginny and realizes her pulse is almost gone. That is the break. Love snaps the last restraints. What canon framed as courage, the Slytherin timeline reframes as detonation. When he drives the sword through the basilisk's skull, the act is not clean. Magic floods out in a tidal shockwave, a raw incandescent surge that rides his grief and terror. Pillars shear, serpentine columns explode into dust. The corpse is not merely killed, it is overkilled, ripped apart by forces that were never meant to be channeled through a child. The chamber buckles, a subterranean fortress, groaning under the weight of one boy's refusal to let Ginny Weasley die. She lives, the diary burns. On the surface, Hogwarts celebrates the familiar narrative. The boy who lived has saved them again. But in private, Flitwick and Dumbledore walk the compromised corridors with wands out, reading the magical residue like seismographs. They measure stress fractures in the foundations, warped ward lines, a flare of power equivalent to a small natural disaster centered directly beneath the Great Hall. Dumbledore does not say, "I told you so." He does not have to. His worst-case memos now have a case study. In the hospital wing, when Ginny finally wakes, it is to find Harry seated beside her bed, hands perfectly still, eyes fixed on the ceiling, as though afraid to look at anything fragile. He has saved her life. He has nearly brought the castle down doing it. And as their gazes finally meet, Ginny Weasley understands with the blunt clarity of trauma that the safest place in this world may be at Harry Potter's side, yet proximity to him might also be the most dangerous position of all. The next crisis will ask whether anyone is brave enough to tell him that. Order of the Phoenix, when the hero starts to scare his own side, Grimmauld Place becomes the answer. But it answers in the language of cracks. Canon remembers that summer as a tantrum, nightmares, caps lock letters, shouted accusations. They are wrong. In this timeline, the 5th year is where the existing fractures in Harry's mind meet the engineered soul resonance Bellatrix, awakened, a harmonic between his magic, his emotions, and the fragment of Voldemort. Each nightmare is not only a vision but a surge. Each spike of fear or rage sends invisible pressure through the house, like a storm front slamming into old stone. Isolation is no longer merely psychological. It is a safety protocol. Dumbledore's deliberate distance, already cruel in the original narrative, becomes incendiary here. The boy who has been treated as a weapon being polished in the dark is suddenly sheathed and abandoned, yet the sharpening never stopped. The mind link with Voldemort is not a passive corridor, but an active circuit, and when the Dark Lord rages, that current arcs through Harry's nervous system and into the walls of Sirius Black's ancestral fortress. The first incident is almost dismissed. Harry, raw with news from the Ministry, snaps at Ron in the kitchen. The air shivers, glasses burst, and the Weasley twins emerge with shallow cuts among their cheeks, laughing too loudly. Molly cleans the blood with shaking hands. It is an accident, she insists. Teenage magic. War nerves. In this timeline, she must say it twice before anyone believes her. The second incident cannot be denied. Hermione pushes too hard about occlumency, about discipline, about the need to treat his own mind as a battlefield. Harry shouts. The word stop detonates like a spell. Chairs topple, portraits wake and scream. and the black family tapestry scorches along a line of names, as if selectively cursed. Ron is thrown into a wall hard enough to bruise his ribs. Hermione's wrist is sprained blocking flying cutlery with a shield charm that forms a fraction of a second too late. After that, the Order meets without him. Moody is the first to name the fear. If the Dark Lord can ride that link, he growls, then Harry is not just an asset. He is a potential breach in every ward they trust. Imagine Voldemort steering one of those outbursts in the middle of headquarters. Imagine him using the boy's love as targeting data, turning his power on anyone who stands too close. Others, quieter but no less ruthless, agree with methodical certainty. Contingency plans are not paranoia. They are procedure in war. Molly and Remus push back. He is still a child, they argue, a masterpiece to be moulded rather than muzzled. The violence is collateral from neglect, not malice. Teach him, hold him, do not cage him. Between them, Dumbledore sits in a silence but is almost physical, haunted by the recognition that his policy of ignorance has not protected Harry, it has destabilized him. The breaking point comes in the headmaster's office. Canon gives us a boy hurling objects and words. Here, the scene escalates into structural failure. When Harry's rage finally erupts, at secrets, at prophecy, at the casual way adults gamble with his life, the shelves do not just topple. Ancient enchantments crack like ice. The silver instruments scream and implode. Fawkes, caught mid-flight, is slammed into a wall of invisible force, feathers and blood spattering the Elder Wand, where it lies hidden. For one exposed heartbeat, the wand awakens, tasting the chaotic resonance pouring off the boy. Dumbledore understands then, with a clarity colder than fear, if that fury returned fully, intentionally, on a human target, they might not survive it. Not even him. Pattern interrupt. Imagine the Order drafting plans, not to save Harry, but to stop him. At what point, the narrative now demands, does a resistance movement become justified in treating its prophesied savior not as a protected heir, but as a potential threat that requires fail-safes, binding rituals, even lethal options? And if they cross that line, who, in the Slytherin timeline, will be the first to tell Harry that the war may one day require defending the world from him? The Department of Mysteries. Grief as a weapon of mass destruction. The Department of Mysteries provides the answer, not as theory, but as impact trauma. The wizarding world believes this battle is a reckless rescue attempt, a tragic miscalculation by impulsive teenagers. They are wrong. In this timeline, it is the first field test of what happens when the boy who lived becomes a weapon being polished in the dark by grief itself. The manipulation begins long before Harry's feet touch the polished black floors. Voldemort does not merely send a vague image of Sirius in pain. He constructs a sequence, a curated nightmare designed to drag Harry's soul resonance to the edge of rupture. Ron screaming as a green curse closes in. Hermione choking on dust beneath falling stone. Ginny, already dead in the Slytherin timeline, shown dying again, a wound reopened with methodical certainty. Each vision is an incision, carving panic into love and transmuting fear into a clean, bright rage. By the time Harry bursts into the Hall of Prophecy, wand handshaking, the battle is already lost on a psychological level. Spells ignite the darkness in staccato flashes. Shelves of prophecies topple like glass dominoes, each shattering orb a whispered future dying in mid-sentence. Harry moves with tactically lethal intent, not as a student, but as a human shield, hurling himself between Death Eater curses and the fragile bodies of his friends. Every Protego, every desperate Expelliarmus drags more raw power through a magical core already frayed by Horcrux resonance and adolescent fury. The irony is surgical. The more he loves them, the more dangerous he becomes to them. In this timeline, his protective instinct is not just noble, it is structurally catastrophic. Then Sirius falls. The moment stretches, a silhouette framed against the veil, a half-formed grin, a curse catching him mid-taunt. Canon remembers Harry's scream as sound. Here, the scream is an event. The noise rips out of him as magic, a detonation of unmetered power that turns the Hall of Prophecy into a collapsing fortress of glass and stone. A shockwave blasts outward from Harry's body, invisible yet absolute. Shelves shear away from their anchors. Orbs explode into incandescent dust. Bodies, friend and foe alike, are hurled into unforgiving walls. Silence follows, but it is not peace. It is aftermath. Ron lies crumpled against a broken plinth, eyes unfocused, blood matting his hair where skull met stone. Hermione is half buried under fallen shelves, arm twisted, robes soaked where glass has opened, long parallel cuts along her side. Neville's wand arm dangles at an impossible angle. The less strange mask opposite him is cracked, its wearer choking on shattered teeth. Even the arriving Order members stagger, ears ringing, nerves misfiring from the concussive blast. At the center stands Harry, chest heaving, wand slack at his side, staring in dawning horror at the radius of damage he has personally authored. He wanted to save them. He nearly annihilated them. It is into this crater of guilt that Voldemort steps, coalescing from smoke and hate at the far end of the ruined hall. He takes in the scene with a practiced general's eye, the injured allies, the maimed followers, the boy at ground zero of his own catastrophe. And he smiles, not at Harry's survival, but at the proof that he no longer needs to kill him. He only needs to keep pressing, keep feeding visions and losses into that volatile core, until the world finally understands that the greatest existential threat to those Harry loves is not the Dark Lord before him, but the masterpiece to be moulded standing in the rubble. The war, from Voldemort's perspective, has just acquired a new primary weapon: Harry Potter. Lock down Harry when protection becomes a cage. The Ministry calls it an incident. The Department of Mysteries calls it a precedent. In the days after the battle, the political fallout is as tangible as the scorch marks on the time room floor. The Wizengamot can ignore prophecies. It cannot ignore structural damage to the most secure research complex in Britain. Reports circulate of shattered time-turners, ruptured stasis fields, and a boy whose grief detonated in raw, unfocused power. In this timeline, Harry Potter is not simply a survivor of the Department of Mysteries. He is its most alarming variable. Deep below, in the soundproofed corridors of the Unspeakables, the language becomes clinical. Magical output, emotional volatility, soul resonance anomalies. One memo, never intended for public eyes, quietly reclassifies him as a level red anomaly, a designation usually reserved for cursed artifacts and unstable entities. Whispers slip upward through the bureaucracy. The boy who lived nearly leveled a wing of the fortress everyone else calls reality. They are wrong about what that means, but the fear is enough. The Order of the Phoenix feels that fear first and most personally. Grimold Place, once considered a safe house, now reads to them like a tinderbox wrapped around a bomb. Dumbledore, bruised and aged by his duel with Voldemort, makes the reluctant proposal. Harry must be moved, not simply hidden. He is transferred to a more secure location, layered with wards that no longer orient solely outward. These are not just anti-apparition nets and muggle-repelling charms. They are dampeners, baffles, intricate lattices designed to absorb and redirect magical surges before they reach the walls. Protection becomes architecture. Architecture becomes containment. Visits from friends are rationed like wartime supplies. Ron and Hermione arrive on schedules agreed in advance, never unannounced, never when Harry's nightmares have been particularly violent. Conversations are monitored for his safety. Topics like Sirius, the prophecy, even Voldemort, are gently but firmly steered away. Emotional triggers are to be minimized, as if love and grief themselves were dark artifacts to be locked in a cabinet. In this Slytherin timeline, Harry is still the center of the war effort, but he is also unmistakably a weapon being polished in the dark. Psychologically, the strategy is almost elegant in its cruelty. Harry understands the logic. That is what damns it. He has seen what his rage can do to glass, stone, and human bodies. He has felt that wild, tactically lethal magic roar up his spine. So when Dumbledore explains the wards, when Molly Weasley's hugs become careful, when even Remus stands a half step further back, Harry cannot simply dismiss it as paranoia. The world might be right, or worse, half right. He starts to see himself as the monster in the cage. Resentment coils around terror. He hates them for being afraid of him, and hates himself for giving them reasons. That cognitive dissonance is not neutral. It grinds at his occlumency, frays his self-control, turns every moment of imposed calm into another strike against the glass. The self-fulfilling prophecy arrives on a Tuesday over something almost insultingly mundane. A cancelled visit from Hermione, justified by a healer's report about his agitation levels. Harry's protest escalates into an argument with Moody about autonomy, about trust, about whether he is a person or a classified asset. One sentence: "The wards are for everyone's protection, Potter," lands like a curse. The surge is instantaneous. Magic slams outward, invisible but seismic. Runes flare, stones groan, and for 3 heartbeats the containment web fractures, hairline cracks, spidering through the carefully crafted spellwork. No one dies. No one is even seriously injured. But alarms scream, and every wary instinct in the Order hardens into methodical certainty. Within hours, the response is codified. Stricter controls, reinforced wards, potions to dull his emotional spikes, more distance, more oversight. To Harry, the message is crystalline. They do not see him as a child to be guided. They see him as a potential catastrophe to be managed. The more they tighten the cage, the more his power strains against it. And here, the dilemma sharpens into a blade for the viewer. Is there any version of this containment strategy that does not, by its very nature, sculpt Harry into exactly what they fear, a masterpiece to be molded in isolation, optimized for war rather than love? If you stood in Dumbledore's place, staring at those fractured wards and that shaking boy, would you choose to trust or to lock down harder, knowing that either choice might be the one that finally breaks him? Because the next time those wards crack, they may not hold at all. Horcrux hunt on a knife's edge, camping with a loaded gun. Dumbledore's answer arrives after his death, bound in parchment and regret. The will, the sword, the Hallows breadcrumbs, on the surface, sentimental bequests to a beloved student. In this timeline, they are a legal argument for calculated risk. He insists, with that maddening calm, that keeping Harry caged will not protect the world. It will deliver him to Voldemort as a weapon being polished in the dark, resentful and perfectly primed. They are wrong, he writes of the Order's instinct to fortify Grimmauld Place into a human fortress. Containment is a temporary dam. The soul resonance between Harry and Voldemort is a river that will carve its own path. The only viable strategy is paradoxical. Give the boy purpose and mobility. Surround him with the two people most likely to anchor him, and send him into the wilderness after Horcruxes. The Horcrux hunt becomes, on paper, both mission and therapy. In practice, it is a controlled detonation. The tent is no longer just a cramped shelter. It is a pressure chamber. Ron's old jealousy mutates under new information. He has watched Harry crack wards with a thought, has seen the air shudder when Harry's temper spikes. Fear seeps into every sideways glance. Hermione, ever the rationalist, quietly abandons abstract ethics for risk calculations. Distance to the nearest Muggle village, thickness of the surrounding trees, the structural integrity of their wards if Harry loses control. Every argument is no longer about who is right. It is about what might explode. Harry feels it. Every raised voice lands like a match near spilled potion. The locket's whispering malice slides along the existing fault lines. Abandonment, guilt, the prophecy's crushing authority, and the resonance with the fragment in his own scar twists those emotions into something tactically lethal. When Ron finally breaks and storms out into the freezing dark, Canyon's painful betrayal becomes, in this Slytherin timeline, an act of near-apocalyptic sabotage. The moment the wards seal behind Ron, the world buckles. Abandonment slams into Horcrux proximity. Harry's magic convulses. There is no spell, no incantation, just a silent implosion as the tent, the clearing, and a ring of ancient oaks are crushed inward, then blasted outwards. When the snow settles, Hermione is on her back at the center of a smoking crater, ribs fractured, wand snapped, ears ringing with a silence so absolute it feels like the pause between heartbeats on a battlefield. She stays, not simply out of loyalty, but out of a colder, more terrifying logic. If she leaves, if she becomes one more absence, Harry's last tether snaps, and Britain gains not a hero on the run, but a roaming, magical catastrophe. Her love becomes a form of self-harm, a decision to live permanently within the blast radius. She studies his breathing patterns, like arithmancy, times her corrections to when his hands are steady, chooses her words with the precision of curse breaking. And this raises the question the Order refuses to ask out loud. Could Ron, Hermione, or Ginny ever truly stand against him if he tips over that edge? Or does their history make them his enablers, riding the knife's edge of disaster, because walking away might be the spark that ends the war in the worst possible way? Hallows, Horcrux, and the temptation to control everything. The Hallows enter this equation like a mathematical error. The world is not built to survive. In canon, they are a philosophical test about death and humility. In this timeline, placed in the hands of a magically unstable strategist, they become the perfect architecture for benevolent tyranny. The triad of power is brutally simple. The Elder Wand offers not just superior spell work, but an almost unfair amplification of Harry's existing volatility, turning every surge of emotion into tactically lethal output. The Resurrection Stone offers something crueler, a direct line to the dead, whose loss already drives his soul resonance into dangerous territory. James and Lily as spectral advisors, Dumbledore as a remorseful strategist, Sirius as a ghost of reckless comfort. The invisibility cloak completes the circuit, not as a schoolboy prank artifact, but as the guarantee that if he chooses to disappear with his inner circle, no authority on earth will ever find them again. Combined with the lingering echo of Horcrux magic already burned out of his body, Harry stands on the brink of becoming almost unstoppable if he abandons his last restraints. He has proven he can turn Hogwarts into a fortress, proven he can outmaneuver ministries and Death Eaters with methodical certainty. The Hallows simply remove friction. They turn capacity into inevitability. So the dark but loving choice presents itself with terrifying clarity. Instead of reading the Hallows as an invitation to accept death, this Harry reads them as a mandate to remove risk. He can kill threats preemptively, not in battle, but in the planning stage. Politicians, Death Eater remnants, even rogue auras, snuffed out before they ever approach his people. He can use the stone to summon those he failed to save, building a spectral war council of the dead, asking Ginny what she would have wanted, asking Dumbledore how far is too far, and then quietly stepping one pace beyond it. And with the cloak, he can hide the Weasleys, Hermione, even a grudging Draco in a warded sanctuary where the world can never touch them again. The temptation sequence almost writes itself. Alone in the alpine silence of his private chambers, Harry turns the stone 3 times, and the dead arrive, not as canon's hazy comforts, but as persuasive visions of a closed system. He sees a future where he has carved out an unplottable refuge, a village under a mountain, lit by enchanted daylight, protected by him and him alone. Ron teaching flying to bored children, Hermione running a library of banned knowledge, Molly Weasley cooking for a community that never hears the word war again. No funerals, no casualties, no choice. It is paradise. It is a prison. From the outside, he is their jailer. From the inside, he calls it mercy. They age under his watchful eye, while he, Hallows heavy and battle hardened, walks the outer world as executioner and deterrent. The boy who lived becomes the man who will not allow you to die. Canon Dumbledore feared Harry's temptation toward power as an echo of Grindelwald's ideology, but they are wrong about the nature of the danger in the Slytherin timeline. Here, Harry does not want dominion for its own sake. He wants control because he cannot imagine safety without it. Safety from Voldemort's legacy, and, more quietly, safety from himself. For a long, suspended moment, the narrative could tip either way. His hand closes around the stone. The cloak lies ready. The Elder Wand hums like a live wire in his grip. Does he step into the role of hidden godkin, sealing his loved ones behind beautiful walls? Or does some final loyalty, some unwelcome voice, pull him back from the edge he has built for himself? The answer, as always with Harry Potter, depends on who reaches him first and what they are willing to break to do it. The final choice: hurt them, lose them, or leave them. Harry stands at the convergence of three endings, each one a different way to become dangerous to the people he loves. The world will later pretend there was only ever one noble choice, one straight line into the dark. They are wrong. The first path is the one most Fanon eagerly sketches. Harry as outright betrayer, the boy who lived becoming the boy who turned. In this vision, the pressure fractures him, the Elder Wand hums, the Horcrux scar burns, and he finally lashes out, not at Death Eaters, but at Ron, at Hermione, at anyone who tries to pull him back. It is easy horror, efficient horror, but in this timeline, it is also the least honest reading of his character. Even at his most volatile, shouting in Grimmauld Place, hexing Malfoy in a bathroom, breaking into the Ministry, his rage is always, stubbornly, protective. To push him into deliberate sadism is not an escalation of canon, but a replacement of it, a different masterpiece to be moulded entirely. The more insidious danger sits in the middle. Harry as controlling savior, a weapon being polished in the dark that decides to turn its edge inward on his own circle. He has already tasted unilateral authority in this Slytherin timeline, commanding the sovereign army, rewriting house politics with methodical certainty. It would take very little for that same instinct to pivot from enemies to friends. Imagine him quietly disarming allies for their own good, locking the Room of Requirement into a private bunker where only he holds the key, forbidding Hermione from certain missions because her mind is too valuable a strategic asset to risk. At first, it looks like care. Then the doors stop opening. The fortress becomes a prison. Ron jokes less because it is difficult to make light of a friend who can, with a flick, end any argument. Hermione starts documenting his decisions in the margins of her notes, not as support, but as evidence. The soul resonance that once bound them begins to curdle into quiet calculation. What happens if Harry decides my fear is inefficient? Love, under that level of asymmetrical power, decays into compliance. And compliance, Harry knows from Bellatrix's Alpine lectures on war, is simply fear wearing polite clothes. So he circles the third option like a wound: isolation. If he is the common variable in every catastrophe, the Triwizard Graveyard, the Department of Mysteries, Dumbledore's death, then the cleanest move on the board is to remove himself from the equation entirely. In this timeline, his walk into the Forbidden Forest is not only an acceptance of death, it is an experiment in harm reduction. He steps between Voldemort and the world, yes, but also between Harry Potter and everyone who might be collateral damage if he stays. In some branches, he truly means to die. In others, he engineers a disappearance, lets the legend of his sacrifice calcify while he lives in deliberate exile, a tactically lethal ghost who refuses to haunt. Either way, the victory is double. Voldemort falls, and the version of Harry who might have become a permanent occupying force over his loved ones falls with him. The war ends, but the question does not. What happens when a world built around Harry Potter suddenly has to survive without him? And who, in that silence, dares to call him back? How close canon already came to a dangerous Harry, the silence after Harry's imagined disappearance is unsettling precisely because canon has trained the world to believe in his inevitability. As a hero, they are wrong. Canon Harry is not inevitable. He is contingent, a narrow equilibrium point between savior and hazard, maintained by fragile human scaffolding. Begin where the legend begins, the cupboard under the stairs. A child whose first memories are deprivation, belittlement, and locked doors is already a weapon being polished in the dark, even if no one intends it. Uncontrolled magic flares, glass vanishes, hair regrows. The trace exists because children like Harry can be dangerous before they understand what danger is. In this timeline, Bellatrix names and hones that power. In canon, the Dursleys merely provoke it and then pretend it never happened. By the Chamber of Secrets, the pattern sharpens. A basilisk stalks the school, and Harry walks willingly into the bowels of the fortress alone, armed with a phoenix, a sword, and a capacity for self-sacrifice that borders on suicidal. The world calls it bravery. Look closer. It is a child who has already internalized that his life is an acceptable price. Shift the resonance slightly. Give him one more year of neglect, one more dead classmate, and that same boy might decide other people's lives are acceptable prices as well. Order of the Phoenix makes the threat explicit. The Horcrux in his scar is leaching rage into his veins. Prophecy and isolation grind his patience to powder. He screams at Ron and Hermione, smashes Dumbledore's office, and for a handful of pages, he is genuinely frightening. The world reads this as teenage angst. They are wrong again. This is soul resonance with Voldemort, an emotional feedback loop that could have turned every argument into a duel if one variable had slipped. Consider the Cruciatus on Bellatrix. Harry means it. He wants her to hurt. The spell fails not because he lacks hatred, but because his love for Sirius is still the stronger current. That is the hinge of the entire Slytherin timeline thesis. He does not become dangerous by losing love, but by letting love justify any escalation. The same is true on the Horcrux hunt, where his quarrels with Ron and Hermione are edged with a willingness to walk away, to operate alone, to become tactically lethal, if that is what the war demands. What prevents the slide is not destiny, it is infrastructure. Ron's humour diffuses scenes that could curdle into violence. Hermione's ethics, her relentless objections to unforgivables, to obliviation, to collateral damage, function as a living brake system. The Weasleys' unconditional love gives him somewhere to be a boy instead of a weapon. Even Dumbledore's flawed, secretive guidance is aimed at keeping Harry from confronting the full scope of his power before he has the internal authority to manage it. Viewed this way, the difference between hero and hazard is not nature versus nurture, but whether anyone around Harry is allowed to see the psychological load he carries and name it correctly. Trauma, prophecy, Horcrux. Each pushes him toward a colder calculus. The AU simply removes a few of the hands pulling him back. Linger on the moments where Harry scares even himself. The shout that makes everyone flinch. The spell that goes too far. The impulse to go alone. Then, just for a second, imagine the line not holding. Your turn. When was Harry closest to becoming a threat? Because that line does not always hold. Sometimes it frays, thins and sings with a frequency that feels very much like soul resonance, an unstable harmony between love and violence that could, under the wrong pressure, detonate. Across this exploration, we have traced that resonance from Halloween 1981, when a crying infant became both symbol and payload, through a controlled upbringing that might have treated him as a masterpiece, to be molded, rather than a boy, into political negotiations that weighed his life as leverage. We followed it down into the chamber, where basilisk venom and prophecy brushed against each other, into the department of mysteries, where grief and manipulation turned his friends into collateral, through the Horcrux hunt, where isolation, hunger, and a fragment of Voldemort's soul gnawed at his restraint, and finally to that imagined fork in the road, between a Harry who learns control and a Harry who chooses isolation as the only safe containment for his own power. Strip away the spectacle, and the question condenses into a single, dangerous line. If love is Harry's greatest power, what happens when that love becomes his greatest weapon, turned, intentionally or not, against the very people he is trying to protect? In canon, you can already see the outlines of that weapon being polished in the dark. The basilisk in the chamber, where a 12-year-old is ready to die for a girl he barely knows. Sirius's death in the Department of Mysteries, where he will walk his friends into a trap rather than risk leaving one man in danger. The office explosion after Dumbledore's murder, when rage makes the headmaster's sanctum feel briefly like a siege engine. The Cruciatus on Bellatrix, where his pain sharpens into something tactically lethal before it falters. Each moment is a sketch of the Slytherin timeline, without the Alpine estate, without Bellatrix, without overt training, just raw, ungoverned resonance. So this is where you step in. For you, which moment in the original timeline felt closest to a true dangerous Harry divergence? The basilisk, Sirius falling through the veil, the shattering of Dumbledore's office, the whispered Cruciatus in the Ministry, or another scene entirely? And if you were to tilt that moment a few degrees darker, how would you rewrite it to push him over the edge? A spell that doesn't miss, a friend who doesn't get back up, an authority figure who decides Harry is now a risk to be managed rather than a hero to be trusted? If this deep dive into a more calculating Harry resonates, help decide where the next fracture in the timeline should run. Do we follow a Harry who becomes Minister of Magic and turns the Ministry into a fortress of necessary control? A Harry who openly embraces the dark arts to save Ginny and never comes back from that war? A Harry the Order puts on trial, weighing his intent against the damage his power has already done? Tell us in the comments which "What if Harry became" scenario you want dissected next, and how far you are willing to let him fall. Because in any world where you build a weapon out of a child, the real miracle is not that he wins the war. It is that he does not, one day, turn and aim that power at the people he loves most.